Welcome to Friday Forum. I'm Steve Holgate, chair of the City Club's Issue Forum on the Environment, which produced today's program. For more than 100 years, City Club of Portland is where civic-minded people have come together to find solutions to our region's biggest challenges. Today, we represent a diverse network of people who are eager to learn, connect, and share ideas for a better Oregon. Thank you for joining us at the Sentinel Hotel in downtown Portland. Thousands of people are joining us online, on the radio, and on TV. Live viewers are watching on KGW's website, Facebook feed, and news app. Our radio audience is listening via X-Ray FM's stations, 107.1 and 91.1 FM. TV viewers will watch today's program via Open Signal's community media television stations. We're grateful for the support of our media partners in bringing City Club forums to the community. In addition to City Club's valued media partners, our sponsors, volunteers, and staff enable us to put on Oregon's best civic programs week after week. A special thank you goes out to Northwest Natural for sponsoring today's discussion. Please join me in showing our appreciation to everyone who has made this possible. The Green New Deal has generated as much attention and perhaps more controversy than any proposal before the current Congress. Introduced by Representative Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez in the House and Senator Ed Markey in the Senate, this congressional resolution harkens back to Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal of the 1930s. Though broad in scope, proposing sweeping change to the economic, social, and environmental policies of the country, much of the debate around the Green New Deal centers on its ambitious goals to reduce carbon emissions. Central to achieving these goals is the challenge of changing the way we produce and use energy. Joining us today to address this challenge are Angus Duncan, the founding president of the Bonneville Environmental Foundation, which supports renewable energy development and watershed restoration in the Pacific Northwest. In 2004, Angus chaired the committee that wrote Oregon's greenhouse gas reduction goals and climate strategy. He currently serves as chair of Oregon's Global Warming Commission. Joining Angus is Jack Kerfoot of J.L. Kerfoot Energy Services. Jack is a scientist, energy expert, and author. He started his professional career as a geophysicist in the 1970s during a time of energy crises here in the United States and around the world. Today, he is an outspoken advocate of renewable energy. And we have with us Maria Polk, President and CEO of Portland General Electric. Before joining PGE, Maria was Chief Financial Officer of Mentor Graphics Corporation and served in senior operating and finance positions within the forest products and consumer products industries. She began her career in banking with Morgan Stanley & Company. Maria serves on the Oregon Global Warming Commission and the boards of Umpqua Holdings Corporation and the Oregon Business Council. Kicking off our conversation today will be our moderator, SILVIA Tanner, Senior Counsel and Analyst at Renewable Northwest, a nonprofit focused on advocating for a clean electrical grid for the Northwest. SILVIA represents Renewable Northwest in front of state utility commissions, the Bonneville Power Administration, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. She also serves on the Oregon Women Lawyers Working Parents Committee and on the board of the Oregon Hispanic Bar Association. Please join me in welcoming our guests.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, and I want to express my gratitude for you being here today, as this is a very important, crucial conversation that we need to have. Climate action is of the essence. We all know that the situation is dire, and recently, in the last few months, we've heard from climate experts that we have about 10 years to change course and to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. Yet our current trajectory is not where we need to be. So it is in that context that Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey introduced the Green New Deal resolution. This non-binding resolution was not adopted, ultimately, has not been adopted, but it has entered the conversation about climate action. At a high level, the resolution sets out a plan to decarbonize the economy. A plan focused on creating high-paying careers and benefits for all, centering frontline and vulnerable communities like indigenous communities, communities of color, low-income communities, and depopulated rural communities. This resolution is unique in terms of climate and environmental policy because it lays out principles to ensure that the benefits associated with this energy transformation and this economy transformation accrue to those communities as well as other communities. And because it lays principles to ensure that decisions made throughout this process are made in ways that are inclusive of and led by frontline and vulnerable communities. Having said that, I want to acknowledge that today in the stage, you will not see represented the voices of organizations representing frontline and vulnerable communities. And it is often the case that energy conversations are not open or that those communities don't have access to those conversations. So I want to challenge us all today, the panelists, myself, those of you in the audience, to first ask yourself who is not at the table when energy decisions are being made, and also to work to make space for those voices. Those organizations are working on energy issues today in Oregon. For example, a number of community-based organizations are working on an Oregon Green New Deal initiative under the umbrella of the Just Transition Alliance. And so I encourage you to become familiar with that initiative and other community-led initiatives. I will close my introduction by listing some high-level strategies included in the federal Green New Deal resolution to decarbonize the energy sector. Those strategies include meeting electricity demands with 100% renewables and clean resources, modernizing the grid, making buildings as efficient as possible, including through electrification, strengthening renewable energy manufacturing, and eliminating greenhouse gases from the transportation sector. It is an ambitious plan, and as I said, it's a plan that has not been adopted, so action on climate right now needs to come from outside of the federal level. And that's why I'm encouraged that our largest investor-owned utility in Oregon is so clearly focused on decarbonization. PGE released last week its plan to meet its expected needs, and under that plan, PGE would meet those needs without new fossil fuel resources and with clean resources and renewable energy. And this is important not only because of the impact on PGE's system, but also because it could set PGE as an example of for the region and the country of a utility focused on and working on decarbonization. So with that, I want to welcome Mrs. Maria Poe.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Sylvia. It's an honor to be here with you today at City Club. I appreciate the opportunity to share PGE's vision for a clean energy future, as well as to highlight steps that we are taking to transform our company and to meet customers' changing expectations. Most of you are familiar with Portland General Electric. We are Oregon's largest electricity provider and the state's largest green energy employer. We have been serving Oregonians for over 130 years, one of the few institutions in Portland that is actually older than City Club. We employ more than 3,000 people across the state who collectively work 24/7, 365 days a year to ensure reliable power is there for our nearly 1 million customers. That's about 50% of the state's population and about 3/4 of the industrial and commercial activity in Oregon. At PGE, we work hard to reflect our customers' values and the interests of the communities that we serve. We have a moral obligation to address climate change, and we are working very hard to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The world is transforming. Change is sweeping across industry, and the energy sector is no exception. The Green New Deal was introduced in this context of the changing landscape. Although it's a non-binding resolution with over 30 key principles, it has spurred important conversations at the national level and has some really interesting principles that are already being implemented in Oregon and at PGE. First, dramatic expansion in renewable energy. Second, building and operating a smart, integrated electric grid. And third, an overhaul of the transportation system and sector to reduce the largest source of greenhouse gases. As a provider of an essential service that grows in importance every day, PGE is embracing these challenges and is determined to be a part of the solution and a leader. With the decline of the cost of renewable energy, and the cost declines are remarkable, and with the rapid advances in technology, we have moved from an or world to an and world. We're no longer faced with the trade-offs of the past. Today, we truly can be affordable and clean. We can be reliable and green. While there is a renewed call to action across the state and nationwide, we at PGE stand upon the shoulders of those who came before us. PGE built its first wind and solar facilities in the state of Oregon almost 15 years ago, with Bigelow Canyon and the first solar highway. We're also blessed to live in a region of abundant hydropower, and we have been reinvesting in our hydro operations to ensure that they will be operating for generations to come. Our partnership with the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs on the Deschutes River Basin is a national model of collaboration and responsible stewardship. We really have a great partnership. Today, 40% of our energy comes from renewable, carbon-free resources, 25% from hydro, and 15% from wind and solar. By the end of 2020, that number will be 50%. And we're just getting going. We're closing the state's only coal plant and have recently announced the first major renewable energy facility to combine both wind energy and solar power with battery storage in one facility and at large scale. As we look to the next decade, we're also offering municipalities and other large customers 100% green energy. This builds upon a decade-long voluntary renewable program that is the nation's largest. Over 20% of our customers buy 100% renewable energy. As we look to build a clean energy future, we cannot ignore the transportation sector. Nearly 40% of Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions are from the transportation area, and that number is growing. As you know, as many of you may know, electricity is the cleanest form of energy. And our partnership with the City of Portland, with Beaverton, with TriMet, to build and to operate the first all-wind-powered bus line is working really well. We're also working with Wilsonville Smart Transit, as well as other transit authorities in the state. And this is sowing the seeds of change. TriMet recently announced their plans to convert 2 of their bus depots, both Columbia and Powell, to all electric. We're also working closely with Daimler Truck as they grow their electric truck manufacturing in Oregon, and as well as with Lyft, who's designated Portland as one of its 3 clean ride launch cities. Transformation is hard, so partnerships like these are essential to keeping costs low. And we're collaborating to bring the best that each of our organizations does to these tough challenges. And as much as what I've talked about is transformational, a lot of what we do every day at PGE has not changed. Safe, reliable, affordable generation and delivery of electricity has been at the core of our work for more than a century. And we're good at it. Today, with ever-increasing cyber threats and physical security concerns, we are just that much more focused. And as we work to decarbonize the energy sector, as we look at the transportation sector and electrifying it, as well as other sectors, and while we maintain exceptional reliability, we should never lose sight of the fact that price and affordability really matter. 20% of PGE's customers struggle to pay their energy bills every day, making very real trade-offs between medicines for their aging parents, clothing, even food for their children. And many of our customers, our largest business and smallest business customers, sell into the highly competitive global marketplace. Energy is an important and significant cost. And today, new high-tech and high-paying jobs in this region are coming. These companies are coming because they're attracted by the many things that make Oregon special, including that our energy costs are well below national averages. The integrated utility system is unique in that we serve everyone. We exist to deliver universal and fair service. It's a social compact that goes back to the creation of the utility model some 100 years ago. And equity and an equitable clean energy future is at the heart of the Green New Deal. In closing, my coworkers and I are listening and we're hearing. We're reflecting your values and the interests of customers and communities. And we're leading to make a difference. I believe that together we can deliver on a clean energy future for all. Thank you.
So Angus, I'm going to start with you, and I'm curious, having just heard Maria describe PGE's decarbonization strategy, and having heard some elements of the Green New Deal and its focus on decarbonization, how do you see, from your perspective, this interacting with Oregon's trajectory and expectations regarding greenhouse gas emissions reductions?
Thanks, Sylvia. So I'd start off by, we got to squeeze this into 4 minutes, right? I would start out by just observing that for Oregon, our Green New Deal started at least 15 or 20 years ago, and arguably 30 or 40 years ago when we started investing particularly heavily in energy efficiency. And if you look at the statewide rankings of states around the country that do well in energy efficiency, it's always Oregon, Washington, and 8 states that have power costs that are 2 or 3 times what ours are. We make up the difference with utility programs, with the Energy Trust, with state initiatives. We basically do programmatically what other people do, with price signals, and we do it really well. Green New Deal targets not just electrical energy efficiency and decarbonization, although I think we are ahead of most of the country in that as well, as you just heard from Maria. It's also industrial emissions, it's building use and building efficiency, it's transportation, and we are, I think, further along particularly on energy efficiency, on decarbonizing our two electric utilities, and of course, our consumer-owned utilities are largely already decarbonized. They rely on electricity mostly from the hydropower system. Where we are failing seriously and where we are neglecting, first we're failing on transportation. Our emissions pretty much across the board have gone down since hitting a high point right around the year 2000. But for the last 3 or 4 years, our transportation emissions have gone up. And we don't see, at least right now, the tools immediately at hand to arrest that creep and reverse it. But clearly, the longer-term way we have to do it, it was also referenced by Maria, and that is electrifying our transportation fleet. TriMet is already locked into doing that, to their great credit, but the rest of us have to do it too. And in many ways, it's easier to decarbonize, to negotiate decarbonization with 2 large electric utilities than it is with 3 million individual Oregon drivers. But ultimately, we have to be able to persuade all of us to shift from gasoline and diesel to electric vehicles. Where the Green New Deal doesn't touch at all, but it's an enormously important aspect of Oregon's carbon policy, is in forest carbon. We are blessed, if you will, with forests that are as carbon dense as any in the world, and I mean as carbon dense as the Amazon rainforest, as Central African jungles, and we are actually acquiring net carbon in Oregon's forests to the tune of roughly 30 million tons a year. So our total emissions are around 60 million tons, but we are also acquiring 30 million tons and embedding them in the forests, and we can do better than that. One of the questions that the state's going to have to grapple with is how we look at our prevailing forest practices, particularly on private industrial forest land, and find ways to increase the carbon capture in those forests.
Thank you, Angus. And I want to come back to transportation, but I first want to explore something that's interesting to me, because Oregon has a reputation of a progressive state, a green state, a state that values the environment. Yet part of what I hear you say is we have a ways to go. And if that's the case with Oregon, I'm curious, Jack, about what's going on at the national level.
Well, on the national level, in 2005, the Energy Policy Act, which was a bipartisan proposal, provided tax credits for renewable energy, which effectively jump-started the green energy in America. As a result, U.S. greenhouse gas emissions have actually declined 12% since 2007, primarily from utilities moving from coal-fired power plants to renewable energy. In April of 2005, over 51% of America's electricity, was generated from coal-fired power plants. In April of this year, renewable energy passed coal-fired power as a source of energy in the United States. The states, on a state level, the states of California, Hawaii, New Mexico, New York, Washington, District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, have enacted zero carbon emission mandates. Also, the states of Illinois, Maine, Minnesota, Massachusetts, and New Jersey have also introduced zero carbon emission mandates, which are expected to pass within a year. On the private sector, 53% of the total U.S. wind power has been funded by companies like AT&T, Amazon, Apple, General Motors, Ford, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Starbucks, and Walmart. In the utility sector, Xcel, a major power utility based in Minnesota, but have coverage of 4.5 million customers across the Great Plains states, has committed that all their power plants will be 80% carbon-free by 2030 and 100% carbon-free emissions by 2045. And even though the U.S. has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Accord, I believe real progress has been made, although much more progress must be made.
Thank you, Jack. And it is encouraging as we focus on decarbonizing the transportation sector, it is encouraging to hear and that utilities are becoming cleaner, that the electricity sector is becoming cleaner because it should help as we electrify more vehicles. And so, Maria, actually, before I go to my question to you, I see I need to say that for our radio audience, this is the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Sylvia Tanner, Senior Counsel and Analyst for Renewable Northwest. And with me today, we have Angus Duncan, President of the Bonneville Environmental Foundation, Jack Kerfoot of GL Kerfoot Energy Services, and Maria Pope, President and CEO of Portland General. Now, electrification. Maria, PGE has interesting initiatives to work on vehicle electrification, and there was a bill decision about this, and this is something you mentioned in your introduction. So tell me more about what you're thinking and the future of vehicle electrification.
Sure. So we were very involved with Senate Bill 1044, for those of you who are following the numbers in Salem. And we worked with a number of constituents and really put together an innovative bill that will target the transportation sector. So working collaboratively with many stakeholders to target the reductions in the transportation sectors for carbon emissions, getting about 250,000 vehicles in line with the state's global emission standards. And it's a really exciting bill, and we couldn't be more pleased to see it pass.
Thank you, Maria. And while we are talking about legislation, I think we should talk about the elephant in the room, and that is that in the last legislative session, although we had the Democratic Party had majorities in both chambers, the Oregon Cap and Trade Bill did not pass. And Angus, during the session, I remember hearing a lot of conversation about the potential impacts that a cap and trade system could have on rural Oregonians. And so I'm curious about how do you see, as we move on to future policy design efforts, that interaction of climate policy with rural communities?
Yeah, so I would have to concede at the start that the folks who were claiming that the carbon cap bill, you know, would deeply injure the budgets of rural Oregonians. You know, they definitely won the rhetorical battle, but they didn't win the battle on facts. And so we really need to try to, you know, build up what the competitive narrative is, and it needs to be grounded on facts. And I will just mention two or three. So probably the first and foremost one is that rural Oregon is already feeling the effects of climate change, and rural Oregon is feeling those effects, you know, more harshly than we are in urban Oregon. They are, you know, we go inside our houses and we turn our air conditioners on. They're dealing with smoke from forest fires. They're dealing with smoke from burning fields. They're dealing with crop losses, you know, from those fields burning. They're dealing with drought. They're dealing with you know, bugs affecting their crops, affecting the trees, and affecting the kids. And they are really on the front lines of climate impacts. And we need to be sensitive to that. We have to try to wrap our adaptation policies around that. Secondly, the kinds of remedies for greenhouse gas emissions, which Maria and Jack have already referenced, you know, I just need to reiterate, and that is that electric vehicles at this point are already, on a life cycle basis, cheaper than diesel or gasoline vehicles. They are cheaper to drive by the mile, and for folks who drive lots of miles, more in rural Oregon than here, that cost per mile is a big deal. They're cheaper to service. They don't require as much servicing. The real gap for rural Oregon still is, you know, are there vehicles that are powerful enough that they can work farms and work in forests? And the answer to that is Not yet, but not very far off. Ford is already marketing a version of their F-150, their workhorse pickup, that is an all-electric pickup, and is going to be of huge advantage, you know, out on the farms and out in the forests. The kinds of resources that are replacing gas and coal, the wind and the solar, those costs are already cheaper than just the operating cost of an existing coal plant and competitive with the costs of a gas plant. And those costs are coming down while gas and coal facilities are not. So generally, the objective facts are that rural Oregon is going to be better off, you know, with a decarbonized economy than they are right now. But to be fair, there's a transition set of issues that has to be dealt with. And House Bill 2020, that carbon cap bill, had extended measures in it to try to soften that transition. Yeah, I won't try to go through the entire list, which is about a 2-page list. You're welcome. But I will mention, I will mention just this one, and that is that there was a provision in there that said that that drivers, low and middle income drivers, you know, could get a monetary credit back on the difference between, you know, the cost of driving and the cost of driving with a carbon adder. They'd get a check back. And it would be keyed not to average miles driven, you know, statewide, but to average miles driven county by county. So if you're a rural county, you're going to get a better deal than if you're an urban county. That's just one example of many provisions that were in House Bill 2020 that were intended to try to deal with, you know, overall transition cushions, but particularly rural transition cushions.
Jack, I know this is an issue that you are thinking about as well, about climate policy in rural communities and how we can have a better conversation, perhaps.
Well, I think the first thing to realize is that to business, the first reaction to cap and trade, it's a stick, whereas a tax incentive is the carrot. And what we have to do is to look to turn our opponents to cap and trade into our advocates for cap and trade. And part of that can be achieved with tax credits for electrification, for changing vehicles, gasoline-powered vehicles, to electric vehicles. Actually, Revon is the one that's developing, has already developed trucks that are capable of working industrial trucks, long-haul trucks, as well as farm machinery. So rebates to that will help the transition for their farmers. More importantly, if we're talking about new renewable energy projects, wind, solar, hybrid, which is wind plus solar, geothermal, which are all undeveloped in Eastern Oregon, those provide jobs. A 250 megawatt solar park, 500 megawatt wind farm will generate between 20 to 40 jobs in rural Oregon. These are high quality, long lasting quality jobs that will help reinvigorate the economy out there, as well as biomass and biofuel plants that could be built out there as well. But we have to have the dialogue, we have to have the communication, and we have to build consensus to move forward in a productive, progressive manner.
Thank you, Jack. And as we look forward into the future, Maria, and take the learnings from this last legislative session, I know that PGE supported the Carbon Bill, and I am curious about how do you see the conversation on climate policy developing in Oregon?
Sure. The bill was a comprehensive bill. It covered a lot of different parts of our economy and the energy sector. It was worked on for months, if not going back a decade in time, and really was the production of an enormous amount of collaborative effort. And we look forward to continuing to work with customers, with communities, with key stakeholders on the next steps. You know, clearly, we ended the session in a contentious manner and hope to be able to come back to the table and really enter into a productive dialogue and be a partner with all of the groups that we have worked with, as well as many of the others who have concerns.
And this is a question for the panel, not directed at anyone in particular, but I'm curious, again, as we think about next steps, and as we talk about the Green New Deal here today and recognize that it has elements beyond just energy elements, also equity and environmental justice elements that are at its core, Could the Green New Deal serve as a blueprint for a future climate policy in Oregon? Perhaps one that garners more support from key communities like frontline and vulnerable communities and like rural communities. Any takers?
So I think what I would say is Oregon's role in the Green New Deal is building on the strengths that it has already accumulated in policy and in program, and in showing the rest of the country that a Green New Deal isn't just a concept in a piece of congressional legislation, that it can operate, function on the ground, and advantage the society in which it's functioning. That, I think, is our task for the Green New Deal. And I think we are well on our way to accomplishing it. The carbon cap would have been, will be an essential step in doing that. I would say for all of those who worked hard on that bill and advocated for it, that no one thinks that we are going to step back from that bill. We may step sideways and then we move forward again, but we are going to continue to push on the policy levers, the state's policy levers. At the same time, we are pushing on the programmatic levers, and we are leveraging the private market and the kinds of low carbon, high efficiency resources and technologies that it's offering us. So that's I think, our role.
I think one of the things we should recognize is that we've been working on this for a long time. At PGE, we're moving from 40% carbon-free energy to 50% just in the next couple of years. We're also integrating into our customers' energy usage in a way that we haven't done before. So our customers will be able to curtail their energy usage on the hottest days of the year or the coldest days of the year and get a bill credit of up to, plus or minus 10% on their bills when they opt into programs. And things like this stand upon, what I mentioned, the largest voluntary renewable program in the country that we already have. Angus mentioned some of the highest energy efficiency rates in the entire country come out of Oregon and from PGE. And so we're doing things, whether there's cap and trade legislation passed, whether there's a Green New Deal, we're moving in a stepwise, thoughtful fashion to integrate renewables and carbon-free energy across the system. And what most people don't realize is what we do every day. As an example, today the sun is shining in Oregon, but it also is shining in California, Arizona, and at 3 or 4 times the intensity and solar capacity factors. And our plants operate in concert with all of the plants in the West. They're owned by utilities in an integrated fashion. So we curtail our other generation to maximize that very low-cost resource out of other parts of the West for the benefit of all Oregonians in terms of our carbon footprint. And it's really important to recognize that this system works in an integrated and efficient fashion. So when we don't have hydropower here, we may be pulling in on an instantaneous, minute-by-minute basis, hydropower from British Columbia, from other states in the West, and we all work in concert, and our plants are all dispatched through the West-wide grid at about every couple of minutes. It's really a very efficient and effective system.
Jack, I see you have something
I would add one thing. We have to realize that the climate and the environment in the Pacific Northwest is different from the Great Plains states, the Northeast, and the Southeast. So therefore, the Green New Deal in our region will look very different from the Great Plains states or New England. Interestingly enough, just to put a challenge out there to everyone in Oregon, in 2005, the state of Oklahoma had virtually no renewable energy. The month of April of this year, 49% of their total power was from renewable energy, wind and solar and biomass. The state of Texas is the largest producer of wind energy in the entire United States, generating approximately 25% of the electrical power from wind across this country. So we're seeing major changes in the East Coast, developing offshore wind farms, which has been developed in Europe for over a decade. So we're seeing a major change, an energy revolution in our country right now. We all have to work together to make steps in a positive, proactive manner that achieves the desired results.
And one of the energy characteristics that I think is going to be common all the way across the country is that, that the historic model of a utility, being a top-down supplier of electricity, which we take and use in our homes and in our businesses, is going to change, and increasingly the customer side of the meter is going to be an active player. Maria mentioned a couple of ways that's going to happen, but if we all have electric vehicles, for example, and we have those plugged in most of the time, those potentially are a substantial storage battery that a utility can tap into and then replenish at a schedule that is going to work for the owner of that vehicle. We are liable to have customer side storage capability as well, both electrical and thermal. The consumer is going to be not a passive receiver, but an active participant in their utility system, I think, all the way across the country.
Thank you. And I heard in your answers a lot of really interesting and icky conversations about the grid, and I will confess I am #1 fan of getting into the weeds on electricity issues. But something that I struggle a lot with when we talk about the Green New Deal is, again, something that I alluded to in the beginning, and that is that we tend to think about the electricity aspects of it in isolation to the environmental justice and equity issues that are so core, and principles that are so core to the resolution. And so my question is, again, for the panel, how do you, in your different positions in the industry, empower and make space for the voices of frontline and vulnerable communities to be part of the decision-making in energy?
Sure, well, let me take that one first. Core to PG's value is diversity and inclusion. We have what we call our guiding behaviors, which really guides how we show up and our values as an organization. And 25 years ago, when we rolled those out, diversity and inclusion was a core principle to who we are and what we do. For years, we have been sponsoring and have been an active participant and leader in the Diversity Summit in Portland, and I hope many of you have attended that summit over the years. As we look to the future, we're doing it, and we're including people in many different ways. First, I think we're listening and really hearing what are the needs of the diverse communities, but also we're engaging with high school students through the trades. We have great jobs at our company, and we need terrific people. They do not necessarily have to have a college education, and we're spending times focused in certain areas, in certain high schools, in partnership with the IBEW, with the Carpenters Union, with others, to really show our young people coming up what great jobs they can have working for a utility. And we're listening and we're including the stakeholders in a way that is, I think, really important. And an expression that I've really come to appreciate is not about me, without me. And making sure that when we're talking about these conversations, that we're very conscious of the diverse voices that need to be included.
We have 1 minute if any of you would like to add.
Yeah, I think as with the rural households, it's important to begin with the understanding that the folks who are going to be most exposed to the impacts of climate change are the ones with the lowest defenses against those impacts. Those are low-income households, whether they're in Wasco County or Northeast Portland. And so the first thing we have to do, and the most important thing we have to do, is arrest the onset of climate change. And the second thing is to help all of us, but particularly low-income families, to adapt to the kinds of changes that we're already starting to see out there. Whether that's planting trees in low-income neighborhoods or making access to medical care during heat emergencies, those are all things that are intrinsically more important to low-income households. And then the final thing is making sure that the kinds of low-carbon but also low-cost technologies, are available to low-income households as well, that we are providing the kinds of tax credits that allow a low-income household to acquire an electric vehicle where its operating costs are going to be lower, and whether they do that or not, we're providing them access to transit.
I think it's important to realize that when we talk about renewable energy, we're just not talking about the environment. We're talking economics. In a levelized study for the cost of fuel, the cheapest source of power right now is onshore wind at 5.2 cents per kilowatt hour, followed by solar, followed by hydro, and then natural gas. The cost for coal is almost double, closer to triple now, the cost of onshore wind. By making the move to renewable energy, we can actually see our utility rate costs drive down, which will help the lower income people across this country.
Thank you, Jack. For our radio audience, this is the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I am Sylvia Tanner, Senior Counsel and Analyst at Renewable Northwest. And with me today is Angus Duncan, President of the Bonneville Environmental Foundation, Jack Kerfoot of J.L. Kerfoot Energy Services, and Maria Pope, President and CEO of Portland General Electric. We're now going to open the floor to questions for our panel. Everyone watching or listening today is welcome to ask a question. If you've written a question or on an index card, hold it high for City Club staff to collect. You might also submit questions via Twitter using the hashtag FRIDAYFORUM. To City Club members who would like to ask a question at the mic, please identify yourself as a member and ask one question. In 30 seconds or less, do not make me interrupt you.
Hi, my name is Kathy Moyd. I'm a member of City Club, and I'm also a member of the Citizens Climate Lobby. In addition to the new Green Deal in federal Congress, there is also a bill, H.R. 763, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, which basically puts a pretty steeply increasing price on carbon as it comes out of the ground over the border, but returns all of the money to individuals on a per capita basis, with the feeling that somewhere between half and two-thirds of the people will get more money back than the increased costs of electricity, or of energy, not just electricity. I'm just wondering what the effect is on, would be if that passed for Oregon, and for Jack, what it would be on nationally. And
Thank you.
Well, the first thing I worry about whenever I see a carbon tax or cap and trade is the impact on the lower income. A recent study in the Oregonian said on the homeless, said there were over 150,000 people in the Portland area that were one step away from being homeless. So when we talk about adding costs, that's a concern. Now, will it curtail fuel consumption? Absolutely. But will there be other aspects of that that could be negative? That's my greatest fear.
Thank you, Jack. Please.
Yep. I guess my short answer is what you're describing is what in the trade is called a cap and dividend, and there are 2 or 3 or 4 different models of a cap or a tax to try to hold carbon emissions down. Frankly, I am open to any of them because we don't have a way to pull the cost of carbon into the market today. It is what economists call an externalized cost. It's going out into the future, and someone in the future is going to end up paying the price of the fact that we didn't constrain carbon today. So whether it's a carbon cap and dividend, a carbon cap and invest, a carbon tax, honest to God, at this point, I don't care.
Thank you, Angus. Please.
Hi, my name is Bradford McEwen. I'm a member of the City Club of Portland. Some of the best wind resources that we have available to us are actually offshore on the West Coast. One of the big challenges, of course, is that the continental shelf drops off very deeply on the west as compared to the shallower waters they have on the East Coast. And there have been some aborted demonstration products of floating wind off the West Coast. I'm curious where you see that as far as being, how close is it to being a significant part of our West Coast energy strategy?
I can address that. Actually, a Norwegian company has had a pilot project floating a wind turbine wind farm off the coast of Scotland where the weather is quite severe and is generating power. It's been quite successful. The company, they've changed their name, but basically they're the national energy company, including oil and gas for Norway. They have technology in the offshore from oil and gas that is directly applicable. So actually you're going to see it move forward quite quickly. There's floating wind farms scheduled to begin construction off the coast of Korea. There are 3 different federal water sites off the coast of California for floating wind turbine sites that 14 companies have expressed interest in. I would like to see the U.S., particularly the West Coast, be more aggressive in pursuing offshore wind, and I think we've been lax in not being more supportive of it.
Thank you, Jack.
Today, the costs are quite high, and we've had other alternatives in terms of onshore wind, where we can bring in combinations of wind, solar, I mentioned with battery storage, but even without storage, the resources you can have onshore today are remarkably low cost, as the costs have come down substantially. So it's not just the high cost of going offshore, but it's the alternatives onshore in the West that have really been very beneficial to us lately, and that's where the resources have gone.
I would add that the company's stated objective at Synergy, used to be Statoil, is to get power costs down for offshore wind to 3 cents a kilowatt hour.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Maria.
Hi, I'm Ethan Scarl, City Club member. We spoke of ways in which we should all work together toward a broader energy future. And one way might be to have a more distributed form of energy production than large centralized solar and wind farms. In particular, there was a pilot program a few years ago encouraging residential and commercial landowners to produce their own electricity and be able to get compensation for some of the power they produced, although they were never able to get money for feeding what they produced back into the grid. I'm wondering if you folks might like to be advocating or pushing for a more distributed form where all homeowners can produce their own and contribute to the grid.
Thank you.
Certainly, thank you.
Would one of you like?
I'll take that one on. So with regards to distributed energy, Portland General, we are very much in favor of distributed energy. As I mentioned, we have several projects. We buy a lot of solar energy from customers. We buy solar energy from areas even outside of our service area. Sometimes the complexities of interconnecting are challenging, and sometimes the costs are challenging given the alternatives. So when we talk about at-scale facilities, or we talk about being able to import west-wide renewables, we want to make sure that as we move to a decarbonized economy, that we're doing so in the lowest possible cost and not bringing in resources that are too expensive, so that we can make sure that our prices remain low for everyone. And as we talked about, it's particularly important for the most vulnerable of our economy. And at Portland General, about 20% of our customers are really struggling with their bills. And it's important that we decarbonize in a way where everyone can participate. So we are bringing in all cost-effective renewables that we can, no matter where they're located.
Thank you, Maria. And I realize there might be more responses on the DR issues, but I want to move on to more questions. Please.
Hello, Darren Golden, City Club member. As we green our energy throughout the state, a lot of issue that rural Oregonians have is possibly losing their jobs. And you spoke earlier about how we are training high school students through a trade pipeline, and they don't need college degrees. A lot of issues that plague low-income communities and rural Oregonians are the same when it comes to degrees or similar struggles that they face when it comes to finding work? How are we focusing on training these individuals who may be losing their jobs to the greening of our energy systems, as well as training other individuals for this, not just high school students?
So let me take that one. That's a great question. And it also applies within our own company. Because as I mentioned, we're closing a coal plant where we employ a number of people. And we have a collaborative effort with Green Mountain College as well as with others. And we have a 5-year apprentice program for line people. But we have hired a number of people from the sawmilling and pulp and paper sector into our operations. And they're just terrific. High performers. They sometimes work in our plants, they sometimes work in operations, and we right now can't find enough capable people and have openings, and that's one of the sectors that we go to. But we do a lot of training internally as well as collaborating with Clackamas Community College, with Green Mountain, and others.
If I may also add, if you look across the country right now, coal plants close when the coal runs out. And the renewable energy projects, wind farms, solar parks, are actively recruiting in the coal mining industry because they're well-trained, they have operation experience, they know how to operate in safe environments. So actually what you're seeing is a transition and an active recruiting by the wind farm companies and the solar park companies with the coal industry and even the fossil fuel industry.
Thank you, Jack.
Steve Novick, City Club member. President Pope, if we go to mostly electric vehicles, do you think that we can meet that increased demand with renewables? I think Angus might say, yes, if people are charging their cars overnight when there's not as much other demand on the grid otherwise. Since you're used to dealing with consumers, if that's the answer, my follow-up question is, given that people hate change, will we be able to get people who are used to filling up on their way home to plugging in when they get home instead?
So the plugging in when you get home is actually a really interesting question, and I've talked with a number of mayors and other community leaders about this because we want to make sure that electric vehicles and electric transportation is not just available for people who live in single-family homes and have garages. And so at Portland General, we've started and still have a ways to go on electric avenues where you have charging stations together, fast charging stations and others, and they're in Milwaukee, Hillsborough, there'll be one in Portland, there'll be in Gresham, Wilsonville, Salem, and we hope to do more. So that's a really important component to be able to charge. And those, many times you can do fast charging, not just the sort of slower overnight. As I said, we have a terrific partnership with TriMet, who under Doug Kelsey's leadership is moving very aggressively into all electric buses. And then we're also working with others. But I think as we look at this transition, it's going to go all the way down to the workforce in terms of mechanics, in terms of the car dealerships and how they're set up, and then this transition gets into multi-layers. And so that was one of the things that's so important about the bill that PGE worked with stakeholders on to be able to get at some of these issues, as it is complex, as you know. So thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
Yeah, two observations. One is, people who can plug in at home, drive to work, plug in at work. And in both of those places, they can plug in ways that, at their option, can interact with their serving utility. So that those vehicles become not just consumers of electricity, but suppliers of storage and flexibility to the system. Second observation for those who don't track things like electric vehicles quite as obsessively as some of us, is that right now people think an electric vehicle, well, it's anywhere from 4 to 10 hours to recharge, and that's still true for the sort of first and second generation charging equipment. But there is some third and fourth and fifth charging equipment where they can charge to 80% of the original of the total capacity in 5 to 10 minutes.
Things are moving quickly, including the program, so we
Do I
need
have
to
to
wrap
finish
up.
in 5 to 10
Sorry,
minutes?
Angus. Thank you all for being part of this conversation. We have a lot of work ahead and a lot of interesting things happening.
Thank you all so much. Our time is up. We're so grateful to everyone who made today's forum possible. So thank you to Angus, Jack, Maria, and Sylvia for helping us understand how the Green New Deal can provide a path to a lower carbon economy. Thank you to Northwest Natural for sponsoring today's forum. And thank you to Steve Holgate and the Issue Committee on Environment for producing today's program. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend.